There you go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Game for All show in our new home on the Eat Sleep Game YouTube channel, which is weird to say. If you're watching on YouTube, you know that we already have a very special guest here. So I'm not going to intro my co-hosts down below because you know them already. They might get an intro later. I don't know. That kind of feels appropriate, given that.
I mean, it's cool. You're on my channel now, so
That seems rude. Can I introduce your co-host?
oh yeah, do it, mate.
Do you
Go
know
for
who
it.
they are?
I mean, our names are
Luke
on the
and
thing.
Sean.
Yeah,
Luke and Sean, they're great. Yeah.
old school buddies, mate. Old school.
So,
Yeah,
if you
like,
don't
yeah.
know that voice, that is Mike Bithell, who, of course, is the creator of video games such as Thomas
As
Was
all of
Alone.
them. Concepts,
Yeah,
yeah,
just
all
all
of
of them.
Yeah, I was there in the 70s, and I just was like, we should like waste time on these computers, and an industry was born. It was great.
I mean, you may well have been. I never know with some of these game creators. They seem to go on forever, you know?
We are timeless. Yeah, we are Legion, and we are timeless. And I invented video games.
Absolutely. So, obviously, you've made a lot of very, very beloved games. You know, you somehow made people love a game about a block, which is like one of the weirdest things ever. To be quite honest, I haven't played that game. Thomas Was Alone, but
so you don't love the rectangles. You remain ambivalent towards the rectangles.
I love the rectangles.
You love the rectangles.
I love the rectangles.
we will come
You're
back to Thomas
cosplaying as
Was
Thomas
Alone
right now, so it's
because where I
it's
want
good.
to
Exactly.
start
I thought it's
is
broke.
where I want to start here is my relationship with you, Mike, actually started in a way when I started listening to Play, Watch, Listen, and kind of hearing some of your crazy thoughts, hearing some of those
like, who's this
crazy
idiot?
tangents, and then I was pestering you to bring Solitaire Conspiracy to any other platform except for PC on Twitter for like 6 months. And then you finally did. And
I gave in. I went into the office one day and I said, "Look, everyone, Jordan has been on my case. Let's work out the budget. Let's work out the business. Let's hire some people. Let's get this done." Jordan.
and I'm going to say it right now. I think it's
Yeah.
the best solitaire game ever made. I think it's
Even-
that good.
But Solitaire exists.
No.
Okay.
That the original solitaire, as far as I'm
I mean, you
concerned,
added story to Solitaire.
just not-
So
it's
you've
just
won
not-
That's
me
kind of
over.
my whole deal, is finding something with lots of rectangles in it and then adding a pointless story to it.
I
Slight
mean,
tangent.
I made a
Is
good career
Solitaire
doing
even
that.
still available on Windows? Is it still a baked-in app on Windows?
I don't think it's baked in, but I think it's like you can download it, because I remember I was I was cheekily petitioning Microsoft at one point to like, hey, just swap it out for Solitaire Conspiracy. Like, let's just replace it. Like, it's time.
I mean, I'll be honest. I played it expecting just kind of this cool, fun little card game, and then there was actually a story that I cared about, you know.
Oh, cool.
And then there was Greg Miller, who I actually thought was great in the game personally. He did really well, you know, with and obviously there's the twist in there that I won't spoil for people who haven't played it story-wise. And I mean, I saw that coming, but it's still,
I think most people do, to be honest.
but it still was effective. Do you know what I mean? It still was like, oh, that and the way that Greg plays the twist in the game, because he is who you communicate with for the majority of the game. It just works. Like, if it wasn't for him, I feel like the story wouldn't come across as well as it does. And I think his performance there was very strong. I know there was a lot of kind of joking about, let's get Greg Miller to win an award, you know, and it's like, but actually he was very good.
I wasn't just joking. I was actively attempting, because I think it's fun. I think he did a good job. Like, that's the I knew he had it in him as well, just because Greg is like, he's very he's very used to delivering scripts. Like, he does do a lot of like events and promo stuff where he will be delivering a script, and he is quite good at doing it naturalistically.
I mean, Greg,
kind of selling it.
Greg is sort of, I've met Greg once, but Greg has this weird thing where he's playing a character version of himself anyway, right? Like, he's almost turning himself up to 100.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is, and this is true This week I've taken this approach a few times on a few different games. Danny's similar in Thomas Was Alone, which is a game I made, Jordan.
I'll play it, don't worry.
It's been 10 years, it's fine. It's aged terribly. Celeste is better.
Oh, I disagree.
Like fair play. But like, I think casting entertainers or comedians is often a really good way of kind of getting yourself to that kind of charming kind of performance. I wouldn't cast Greg as Macbeth necessarily. I think he'd probably have to work up to that. But like, in terms of like, if I'm casting like your buddy who's there to help you out and go on a spy mission with you, I want to hang out with Greg for a few hours. Like, that's fine.
Absolutely.
That's fun.
Absolutely.
And Danny was similar in Thomas Was Alone. Like, I think, casting comedians is a really good way, or like I said, kind of entertainers in that sense, is a really good way of kind of fast tracking towards that charm. And you can see that with like, look at Chris Pratt in like the Marvel movies, like going to someone who has that those comedy chops, and then kind of giving them something a bit more serious can work.
It's like,
really well.
wasn't it Steve Merchant in
I
Portal
was going
2?
to say, I was going to say that as well.
Yep. Yeah, consistently a great place to cast people.
So what I wanted to ask you on Solitaire is, obviously, for me, that as a designer, that's not a game that I would want to take on, because it's like, you have the original Solitaire, which everybody knows and loves, right? There are millions and millions and millions of people that play that game. How do you even decide to kind of take that on and try and put your own spin on it? And then, how does it feel, now that it's been out on multiple platforms, you've had a lot of feedback on it and everything? Do you feel like you created a great game there, or is it just kind of a bit surreal to you, the reaction that it got? Because it blew up, right? It blew up a little bit.
It did significantly better than we expected it to. Yeah, that's true. In terms of the first part of the question, like, why do it? It really was, and this is where some of the best games we've made, I think, in my opinion, kind of come from. It was just me playing. It was just an experiment. It was we'd done. It was first year of the pandemic. We'd done North Star Rising, which was like a fun radio drama, but it was so much work to do. Like, the amount of editing I had to do, the amount of process on that. Like, and I had a really good sound designer working on the effects work, but there was still a lot of audio editing that just basically I had to do because there's nowhere else to do it. And I was kind of bored of that. And I just wanted to go and like game jam, essentially, like just go and make something. And something I'd always wanted to do was like try and make a card game, like nothing in particular, but just like try and get some good feeling card game mechanics. I really like just playing with like how an interaction feels. So I just randomly just started looking for variants of Solitaire, found one that I thought was interesting, which isn't the one that everyone knows. It's I'm forgetting it. Alleys and something in Alleys. I can't remember. It's credited in the credits of Solitaire Conspiracy. I know that much because I stole most of it from that.
Wow. Okay.
In terms of how the board is laid out and how the cards laid out and how the system works, basically I took a existing Solitaire game, simplified the rules slightly, and added those power-ups. So I made it my own, but it was definitely like starting from a foundation.
That's what all games do, though, right? Like, if we look back through games, just as the history of games, they have all built on what has come before, and
absolutely
they do.
Streets and
absolutely.
Alleys, by the way, I just remembered. Streets and Alleys is the name of the variant. It kind of looks like alleyways leading off from a street.
And they do absolutely steal ideas, right? They steal things from each other.
Oh, for sure.
And then you have crazy, really original things where someone decides to make a game about a block, which like
that's very sweet of you, but
like,
it's also nonsense.
Someone else made the square already. The shape wasn't original.
No, I invented the rectangle. It was the day after I invented the video game. I was like, what are we going to put in these video games?
But to me at the time, because I remember hearing a lot about the game, and obviously that's where everybody began to know the name Mike Bithell and all this stuff. But it's like, it just seemed so alien to me. It was like, why would anyone even think of this as a game?
I hear you. I think I get way too much credit in so many ways, but specifically in that way, like I don't think I'm that kind of designer. I play something like I don't know, recently, like Inscription.
Okay.
And I'm like, how does your brain work? How did you get to this? That is amazing. It's a complete it's fundamentally mind-blowingly original in lots and lots of ways. I'm not that kind of designer. The kind of designer I am, honestly, I think is I am the kind of the more iterative, the kind of the let's take something and let's like tweak it,
Build on it,
improve
right?
it, hopefully add stuff, but like iterate on it. With Thomas Was Alone, I think a lot of people mistook the constraints I was working under for like an artistic vision. And it's a very different thing. Like I'm a designer, I'm not an artist. Like the reason it's a rectangle is not because I wanted to make some grand statement about emotions and storytelling. It was I couldn't work out what to draw. And I wasn't a very good artist in the first place. Ironically,
don't you ever just want to blag the fact that, oh yeah, that was artistic,
Oh, and I did for like 2 years so that we could get the game off on its own. But years have passed now. I can be more honest. But that's I think being honest about how you come up with stuff is how you improve how you come up with stuff. And I think my practice with Thomas Was Alone, it was I want to make an indie platformer. I played the ones that come out up to that point. I was also a big fan of like Naughty Dog. Like I see Thomas Was Alone as like lo-fi Uncharted because there's a lot of like scripted moments and bit where you're running away from platforms, they're falling. But if you stop, they'll stop falling. There's a lot of like AAA kind of illusion of gameplay stuff happening in Thomas Was Alone as well. Like that's what that game was from my perspective. I did go down the art route a couple of times. It's ironic now because I've got a prototype of Thomas Was Alone from years ago that I'll never show anyone, where it's basically the Among Us art. Like they were rectangles with little, like they were like suits, so like a space suit but a rectangle. So you're putting different guys in space suits of rectangles with the little eye holes from Among Us. And it's like, man, like maybe Thomas Was Alone could have sold a few more copies if I'd actually gone down that road, like the rectangle thing. But yeah, no, I think the simplification kind of worked well and did the right job there. I feel good about where that ended up. But it's important when you're thinking as a designer about the work you do, like to think honestly. And I was not making a statement. The voiceover, the story, the thing that everyone loves in Thomas Was Alone was an afterthought. It was meant to be text showing story, and those awful things that every myself included, every student did when they learned After Effects for the first time, where like text pops up, like so you'll have like it's always Fight Club, it's always a line from Fight Club, and like you've got the text kind of coming up saying the words as they say them in the film. I was going to do dialogue. I was going to do all of the story as like text showing up in levels with no voiceover. And then I realized, oh no, I have to make all my levels around this awful like text idea, and it's really hard to do. I should just record some audio. And then went down that road. Like the greatest thing that made that game a hit was probably the writing and the voiceover, and that nearly wasn't in there. And once you've achieved that level of success with something that was not necessarily a fully conscious decision, any concept you have of like the auteur just blows out the window because you're like, well, clearly idiots can also achieve this stuff. So how would I ever know the difference? Like it's yeah.
Fair enough. Luke, before I move on, do you have any specific Thomas Was Alone questions?
It's not quite specific, but you've said before that you wouldn't necessarily mind revisiting Thomas Was Alone in like 20 odd years or something like that. Like, is that something that's percolating in the back of your mind? Because obviously the story that was told in Thomas was that of like a young person trying to find themselves and find friends and stuff like that, and then going back to doing it in 20 years time, doing a sequel and doing it, I don't know, in hindsight, or doing it from that other side of your life. Is that something you're just like plotting in the back of your mind as you go through, or is it just something you maybe do in hindsight looking back eventually?
Yeah, no, it was something I started saying like straight up. So when Thomas Was Alone came out, I mean it bombed for like half a year and then kind of did well once YouTubers found it, basically. And from that moment, there were lots of people in my ear saying, Mike, could you make a sequel, please? Like, there's a lot of business people around me that were like, and totally right to do it. Like, they were making the right argument of like, there's definitely an audience here. This could be a franchise, blah, 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 blah. And my answer from that moment was, I'm not an interesting or good enough writer yet to do a good sequel that lives up to what people expect from this. Sure. So therefore I'm going to wait. And as time's gone on, I do. I check in every now and again, like in between projects. I'll just think about like, is it time to do Thomas Was Alone 2? Like, and also the acronym's a problem. We're gonna have to work that one out at some point.
I'll tell you
but
what,
like,
Mike. When you do it, I'll come and work for you for free.
oh, that's very kind, but that's absolutely nothing I would ever let anyone do. Never offer to work for free for anyone. There will be people in the industry who are very happy to take advantage of you. But yeah, no, for me, it's like, it's always about like, what do I want to say with this, and what would be, what's the perspective I'd bring? And you're right. I think Thomas Was Alone definitely. I said this in an interview the other day, actually, where it feels to me like it is like, in retrospect, I didn't realize this at the time. It feels like someone in their 20s kind of longing for a good collaborative experience, basically, a working experience. And then, of course, I've gotten to kind of build my company since then. So I've kind of got that now, and that's an interesting, different position I'm in now than the person who wrote that game. But do I have? Is there an interesting thing to say? Yeah, I'm not sure. I think
Sure.
I think for me, yeah, I want, if I'm thinking of it as an audience member, I want to play the version that like 50-year-old me makes. I want to play the version that like comes in with some like life experience.
Maybe it will be like your final game. Maybe that's what, you know, you'll build up all this hope for this sequel for years and years and years, and then it will just be your ride off into the sunset final game.
I mean, not to get too dark on this very fun podcast, but it has crossed my mind that if I'm ever like given a terminal diagnosis, 100% that's what I'll do.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, that's a plan, though. That's like that's planning ahead for Well, I mean,
if
hopefully terminal illness doesn't come into it. Yeah.
No, but it's like planning for that eventuality sort of thing. It's like hoarding cans of food for the apocalypse sort of thing.
I've also, it's a running joke as well that I've made it very clear to everyone who's like a dependent on me, or you know, everyone I work with, that like, if I do get hit by a bus tomorrow, that they're to exploit and milk the Thomas Was Alone franchise for all it's worth. Because once I'm gone, I don't care. Like, you feel free. You make as much money. So yeah, if I go under a bus tomorrow, expect Thomas Was Alone 2 within 6 months, and it won't be good, but you will buy it. That's definitely happening.
I can't wait for the little Lego blocks of Thomas Was Alone. That will come out as well.
Someone sent me. Yeah, I want to be alive for. I want to. That's genuinely one of my dreams, is the Lego set of something I worked on. That's 100%.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be very cool.
One day. But yeah, no, I think the problem with your plan, Jordan, of that being my last game, is I think for me to plan for it to be my last game, I would have to like be willing to step away, and I genuinely assume I'll be in the retirement home.
Still having these ideas, right? And
like jam, like just making terrible game jam games that no one wants to play. Like I don't see a point.
I mean, that's where some of the best things start, though, right? Like, I'm kind of working on something now that is a passion thing, and it's like, but it starts by me just messing around at home, figuring out what I would do with this thing if I was able to do it. And then once you get the money to kind of fulfill that dream, you know, you have different places you can go. And that's where I wanted to move with another game of yours that really interests me and I own, but I have not yet played. And that is John Wick Hex. And first of all, I want to know how that even sort of came about, because that's a big IP, you know. How does little indie studio Bithell Games, you know, get a big IP when I assume there was probably some of the big boys trying to get it as well? You know, it's like, you would assume that everybody wants to make a John Wick game. Certainly a few years ago, you know, when that franchise was really a massive thing, and you guys got hold of it and did something really interesting and different that people maybe wouldn't expect from a John Wick game, right? So how did that happen?
Well, I think it was a confluence of things. I think there was a lot. I think it was the right moment, and I think it was the right like IP for that to happen with. So there's a bunch of things. I think first of all, I don't think the big publishers are as interested in licensed games as they were. I think with good reason. I think they are. If you look at like, it's much more valuable for Ubisoft to build up Far Cry or Assassin's Creed and maybe do a movie of those,
if they can own the IP, right?
If they can own it, yeah. Like the days of like, they are definitely the big publishers, the remaining big publishers, not many of them, but the big ones they are in the IP generation and ownership business. They're not necessarily looking to pay someone else for IP. So I think that's a factor that they kind of them stepping away a bit. I don't know what other pitches were around for John Wick, but I assume there wasn't a $50 million first-person shooter based on John Wick that was like in the offing. I assume that. I don't know, but I assume that wasn't the case. In terms of how we in particular got it, I think it was. This is where the IP is important. Is John Wick is an indie movie, like in terms of its kind of the thinking behind it. The story of like the first movie was they basically shot that film either with no film studio attached or with like I think it was like in a minimal way.
Wow. Okay.
Because no company wanted to. You can't have spoilers. You can't have a dog die in a movie. You can't do it. And that was the common wisdom. And that meant that no one would pick it up at the script stage. No one wanted to make that movie. And the legend goes that even once the film was shot, there were a lot of studios that didn't want it. And Lionsgate, picked it up and
I mean, that's crazy because it was a massive success, right? So
right, but like these things are small in that way. And then I think once as it went on, Lionsgate they've described themselves to me as like the smallest big studio or the biggest small studio, one of the two. They're definitely in that kind of like place with their films, and you can see that with like Twilight as well, and you can see it with oh god, I'm forgetting.
They take risks that
Katniss
some of the
Everdeen,
big
what's
boys
that
don't,
one?
right? Hunger Games.
Arrow. Hunger Games. God, why that? Yeah, they're indie films. They then blow up into these mega franchises. But if you think about what those original films were, they're weird pitches. And I think as well, that was the attitude they went into, like looking for game partners with, was who's going to do something odd with this, because there's no point making the boring game because it won't be as good as Call of Duty and whatever. So let's go for interesting, because interesting is what Lionsgate kind of does business wise. And apparently my name came up very quickly when they started talking about weirdos. And that's and they gave me the opportunity to kind of pitch. So yeah, I think that's why you come to someone like me and my team, is that you come to us because you want to not just cash in on a franchise, but you want to like expand and do something interesting with it that kind of recontextualize it.
So what was that experience like of, you've kind of had your own IPs that you've built up and done your own things with. How did it differ having to work with an existing IP, and what challenges maybe did that present compared to having something completely original?
It definitely added more like oversight, like for sure. Obviously, you got more people at the table with opinions, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. Like it adds time and effort. And I think that was probably the thing on John Wick, was we just didn't have much time, and that kind of was just the situation with that project. But in terms of like creative, I found it weirdly liberating, because what was interesting about it was so many of the problems going in were solved, or that there were solutions to, and there were already a lot of experts in the room who knew how to do this. So for example, like, it was almost like we had a multi-million-dollar 2-hour prototype video that we could look at. Because if you're ever like, what does a John Wick fight scene? How does that even feel?
You have so much material there to work from. You have
so much material in terms of what the film is. So you can kind of look at that, and a lot of times we'd be stuck on like a design question, and we just go and watch the movies, and we go, oh well, that's how you fix that, because it's 30 minutes into the second film, he solves that problem. The other thing though is the experts, and that's what you get. I remember my pitch to them was basically like, either give us the IP, or I'm going to go and make this game and just call it
something else.
One Jick. Yeah, we'll come up with a different. We'll make something else, but it'll be this game. And I remember making that pitch. I think it was kind of gung ho, but looking back, like we couldn't have done, because so much of what's in that game is the result of me going and doing like me talking with their stunt team and doing like some training with their stunt guys, which I was terrible at. It's on the John Wick 3 Blu-ray, and it's really embarrassing because it's like the thumbnail on.
I was gonna say I have to buy that now.
just on or on iTunes. It's like I think it's like the thumbnail for the special features on. It's just my red face.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like, why would you choose that? You've got literally the best looking man in human history in your movie. Why are you putting this on there? But anyway, but so like the martial arts training and talking to them about the flow of combat and how they build a scene, you know, because John Wick Hex, almost you're kind of doing fight choreography rather than fighting a lot of the time, and talking to them about that, talking to the producers, talking to Chad the director, going to kind of sit down with him and talk through what he was thinking when he was putting together these movies, working with the actors, going to the gun range with the guy who basically originated the gun combat style of John Wick, and talking through the thinking and the process, and you know, shooting automatic rifles with him. Like it was all really useful and interesting, and kind of getting me, and by extension the team, into the kind of the mindset of what
it helps
those
to
movies
paint
were.
that picture in your head, right? Of where you kind of need to take certain things.
Yeah, these are people who have lived and breathed this set of challenges for like years. They've been thinking about this stuff forever. You can go to you can be in the studio recording the cutscenes with I was recording the cutscenes with Ian McShane, who plays Winston in there.
That's so crazy to me. Like Ian McShane.
But, yeah, he was great, but he was there, you know, reading a script that I'd written for him, and he's like, I don't think Winston would say that in that way. Could we change lines? Like, of course we can. You've
the character.
By this point, he'd been in 3 movies. It's like, you know better than me what the guy should be saying. You carry on. And having that access was super useful. And it was also just, honestly, just as a film nerd as well, it was just interesting seeing the process, you know, getting to read the screenplay before they shot it, getting info from the set. We never did a set visit, but kind of getting the awareness as we went through, getting to see the first cut of the movie before like the notes went back from the studio of the third film, because it was in production. So seeing like what's a movie look like before then, you know, being at the premiere with everyone and kind of seeing the actual kind of release version. It was just that side of it was really cool as well, and just kind of getting that insight into how it works.
I haven't played John Wick Hex yet, but I've heard from everybody who's played it that I know that it's a great game. So what I want to ask is,
very kind.
If the opportunity kind of arose, would you work on that IP again? And you know,
sure.
Do you have ideas that you could do something with it in a sequel?
Yeah, we definitely. Yeah, it was definitely a process I'd be interested in kind of exploring again, either with John Wick or with, you know, other licenses. Like it gave me an interesting taste for how Hollywood works and understanding of that. I don't know, no one's seen this show, but there's a show called Get Shorty. There was a movie years ago, but like there's a TV show of it now.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 2 gangsters who try and make it in Hollywood. And me and my producer Ben, like, well, that was on TV while we were doing this process with John Wick, and there was so much of an overlap of like, we're just 2 chancers from the UK who somehow managed to like convince people that we should be in, you know, Man's Chinese Theatre at a premiere with Keanu Reeves, like, you know, saying hey to literally running into Hasselhoff in the corridor, you know, just like, it's a weird situation where it was a very strange.
Did you have any kind of like big fanboy moments? You know, did you kind of run into anyone where you're like, oh my god, I can't even believe that I'm meeting this person? Like, where it was really
I was
surreal?
a little like that with Ian McShane, because I was also a big Deadwood fan. So like getting to meet him and chatting to him. And Lance Reddick as well, like genuinely, like again,
love
I love The Wire, love Lance. I like hanging out with him, like and getting to talk to him about his process and everything was just very fascinating. Other than that, no, it was just it was I'm pretty good around famous people generally. The only time I've had a proper freak out was Hideo Kojima. Hideo Kojima, just meeting him just because I was such a fan of him as a teenager.
I mean, Kojima is the reason that I am a game designer. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and I said much the same to him as I was like tearing up. It was terrible. I embarrassed myself.
Yeah, if I ever met him, I'd definitely be that way as well. So.
Well, I also wasn't prepared. It was there was a Gamescom where I was on stage and with, I think, Volume, and he was there with one of the Metal Gears, and I knew when you're preparing for one of those big E3 stage shows or Gamescom, if you're like low level like me, you don't know what the other people talking are, because obviously it's all like secrets and NDAs and that.
Yes.
And no one had told me he was there. And a producer I was hanging out, like I guess I was in like a green room or something, and a producer from Sony came in and said, "Hi, Mike. I've just got someone outside who I thought you might like to meet." And kind of takes me out to the corridor. No prep. And Hideo Kojima is exactly in person who you want. He's incredibly fashionable, has an entourage of like 10 people around him at all times. It's just very overwhelming. It kind of broke me. Meeting someone has gone well when you splutter to them for 2 minutes, they walk away to do something else, and one of their assistants comes up and goes, "Oh, did you want a selfie?" And it's like, oh, I'm in the fan category, not the peer category. We're never going to have a conversation ever again. Oh, that's a shame. But yeah, no, that's the only time I've really freaked out. But yeah,
fair enough. Sean, you've sat there very quietly, but you have an interesting.
Well, I wanted to ask
history as well. So what questions do you have for Mike?
Well, going back to what you said earlier, Mike, how these big AAA developers and big publishers aren't really interested in these IP like John Wick, and it did make me think how Dune is getting that. I think they're getting a 4X game, and you kind of think like Dune makes sense for a big AAA game, but it's not getting it. Like, do you think maybe more indie studios should be going after IP like this? Like, do you think maybe they're not aware that the door's open to them?
I think people would be surprised. Yeah, I think we definitely, I think games in general, but indie in particular, do tend to underestimate how interesting we are.
Right.
And I think go for it. Like, I definitely have always kind of had that attitude, and that's one of the reasons, I got John Wick, and I continue to have interesting conversations with anyone who'll listen to me, and also with people who won't listen to me. Like, if someone's watching this who's an indie who's maybe shipped a game or two, like usually people want to see like some,
Sure.
that you can actually release a game. But if an indie's watching this who's done that and their games are pretty okay, you'd be surprised who you can go in a room with if you just kind of reach out and start asking.
Sure.
So yeah, I've definitely pursued.
I actually
those kind of
gave that
conversations.
advice to someone a few weeks ago, where I was like, it's just about making the right connections. Like, if you know the right people, and if you have a history where you can show what your work has been, you can get places. Like, this industry isn't impossible to be a success in. It's just, you may not be a AAA, hundreds of millions of pounds kind of success, but you can be a success at a small level, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of boundaries, like, for sure, obviously, for lots of people. So it's tricky to give such a universal kind of like suggestion there, but like I definitely think people should try and just get used to rejection. Like, it's another thing that I often get asked by other indies is like, how do you get famous people in your games? And it's like they always go to Andy Serkis, who was the bad guy in Void. How the hell did you get Andy Serkis? And the honest answer is, I asked 10 people and he was the one who said yes. Like it's not, there's no great, and that's, by the way, he was brilliant and I'm very glad I got him. But like, rejection is a part of these processes, and you kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit. It's not like dating. You have to be willing to be rejected.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit trite, but it's that saying of, you can only get yes if you ask the question, right? And so yeah. No, I mean, I'm just interested because
most pitches, yeah, and I think, and that's something someone balked at me the other day because they were asking me about pitching, and they'd just been doing a few pitches. I only done like 5 pitches, and none of them had gone anywhere. And they said, "Oh, you must not have this." It's like my failure rate is probably like, my success rate is probably below like 5 to 10%. Like, I have to go into a lot of rooms to get the yes that I need from someone. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with going out there and trying.
Yeah, it just makes me think of all these IPs that have resurfaced. Blade Runners. I was kind of shocked that when it got that massive, sequel, that nothing was done with it from any other entertainment property. I think there's a TV show in the works. I think
there's a bit now, isn't there? There's like an animation. There's a TV show. Yeah, but
that world is.
It could be a game.
It should be a game, right? And
that's what I wanted Cyberpunk to be. I was hoping it was going to be a Blade Runner sort of gritty, gross kind of world, but I really want that.
Sorry, It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think for a lot of indies, and I think it's totally a valid argument, they would say, well, I can go and I can make something inspired by Blade Runner, and the press will still say it's a bit Blade Runner-y, and if you're a Blade Runner fan, you'll probably still get it, even if it doesn't officially say it's called Blade Runner. So why would I want to jump through the hoops? Yeah. And I think that's where, for me, the benefit is the collaboration, is the element of like, yeah, but if I worked on a Blade Runner game, I might get to have a chat with Ridley Scott about what he's going for, you know what I mean? Or I might get to chat to Villeneuve about the new stuff. Like there's enough reasons, there's enough benefits to that come with it. I think people or the old days IP was thought of as like a profit thing rather than like a process thing. And I think that's the tweak people maybe need to make to their thinking of who do you want to work with, which room do you want to be in, who can you learn from most? And that's definitely what guides where I'm going and what I'm doing.
And that's what I was just going to say is like having an IP can build up certain connections that you wouldn't get otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. But also there is something to be said for name value of an existing IP, right? Like even within games, me and Sean often have these conversations around why not just have a game be a new IP with a new name, even if it is trying to be what this other thing was before. Something like Perfect Dark, as example, why is that not just a brand new IP? Why are they rebooting it? But that's because regardless of what you think of Perfect Dark, it has some sort of existing name value within the industry, right?
They've invested millions in you thinking of the words Perfect Dark to make that example. That's cost them a fortune over the years, and in theory, you're more likely to you'll pause as you're scrolling through the 5 million games that are out next week, and when you see that name, it goes some way. It also goes some way in business senses behind the closed doors. So like me going into a meeting with a platform holder, let's say, I don't know, Sony, me going into a room with Sony and going, hey, I've got this new kind of turn-based but a bit weird strategy game about gun combat. I think it's really interesting, versus me going into a room and going, I'm making the John Wick game. Like those definitely are different conversations. So there's lots of ways that can lubricate and help in kind of a business sense as well. But honestly, like I think that effect is much lower than it used to be. The other aspect that I think is really cool that I think, again, people maybe miss is film people think games are really cool and are interesting and are the future. So you often, whereas it used to be that games, if you were making a licensed game, I worked on licensed games 15 years ago when I was working I worked on like SpongeBob stuff, a lot of Nickelodeon stuff in my past.
Okay.
And back then we were a lunchbox. The only reason for you to make a PS2 game based on Nickelodeon brand was so that when someone's gran is in the supermarket looking for a gift for their kid, their
and they see it, right?
They see discounted $5. Oh, that's a game on the PlayStation. They've got one of those, and they'll grab it. And the kid doesn't want it. The kid wants something good, and the grandparent didn't read a review before doing it. They were lunchboxes. They were merchandise.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think film people, when you talk to film people about this stuff, increasingly they see games as a way of expanding the kind of the relevance. Even they actually see games as an expansion of what they're doing on the films. Like if you're in charge, if you're making John Wick, you only get to make one John Wick movie every couple of years. Keanu's got other things to do, and it takes a long time to make them. And you've got, it's 2 hours of entertainment. And people maybe buy it on demand or a DVD later, but you don't get to mind share is the thing. You don't get to exist in the public consciousness long term. Games allow you to do that. That's one of the reasons you see such a push for TV shows of big franchises and IPs. It's about staying in the conversation and being a part of pop culture. And games are another way in which these franchises can do that. So I think we have more value to them than people maybe realize. That's why you see Netflix doing 7 Stranger Things games, and you're like, really? That seems like overkill. But for them, it's about giving you a bunch of stuff while they're making the very expensive next season of the TV show. It keeps
the conversation going, right? Around something, for sure. So where I want to kind of finish this conversation is something that's quite personal to me, but also very big and important in games, and that is accessibility, because I have a disability, and while I don't need accessibility features to play my games. I'm fortunate enough that I don't really need those features. I do think they're important. And what I wanted to ask you is, I'm not going to say studios resist, but why do you think that some studios still find it so hard to kind of implement accessibility or just go the right way about it? You know, we see certain games that people just kind of go, oh, it doesn't need, you know, we see the conversation about difficulty all the time of, oh, if there's an easy mode, it's changing what the game is. And it's like, no, they've given you an option to play it on a different difficulty. It's not changing the game. It's only changing the game if you make that choice as a player to do that, right? And it seems so weird to me. So where do you kind of sit on accessibility? And I know that indies have different challenges when it comes to implementing that stuff, but
yeah, that's where I was going to go. Is it kind of brings us full circle back to some of the stuff I was saying about Thomas Malone. It's kind of an art and practicality conversation. Those two things are very separate. So from a practicality point of view, literally anything you add to a video game costs money, right? Like, it takes someone has to do some work to do it, and therefore it costs money. And the more complicated the thing, the more work that has to be done, the more it costs. So with any accessibility feature, when you're going through like accessibility features on a menu, you know, you have to basically go, that's $5,000, that's $5,000, that's $5,000. Like I don't
of course
the numbers will be different, but like there's a shopping list there. There's a cost of doing that.
And I guess it sounds, you know, some people will hear that and go, but surely there shouldn't be a cost on accessibility for players, right? But at the same time, there shouldn't be a
cost on accessibility for players, but there definitely is a cost for anything on developers.
Yeah. And it means you have to pick and choose to a certain degree.
It does currently. It does mean that, yeah, so for me as an indie developer, I'm definitely having to choose, like, okay, I can't do the full suite that a AAA game could do. Where are the points where I can be the most thoughtful and have the most impact for most players? So, for example, actually, I'll come back to that example because it's more interesting. But yeah, like there's just lots of ways of doing that. The other thing that's crucial there is those costs can be brought down. And that's where I know a lot of work's being done in a few different ways of basically standardizing these solutions, so that I could go on the asset store and buy, like, for $10, here's the 10 easiest, here's the 10 accessibility features every game should have. Buy it for $10, $100, whatever, and you can just slot it into your game. And those kind of fixed solutions will work really well in the indie space and will have massive impact. I know a few different people are working on that kind of solution for it. And that's smart, because that kind of hits the practicality problem.
And I do actually know from my side as well, I know that some of the kind of bigger companies are pushing this accessibility stuff very strongly, and they are actually helping some of the smaller partners they have to implement this stuff as well.
They're also through their experimentation, they're finding a solution. And I think, again, this is something that maybe players don't fully understand, is like, if you think about like the visibility mode it's in a lot of Sony games, but in Last of Us, where like it makes the villains like solid red and the player character solid blue.
Yes.
Like, to do that practically, so to actually, like, literally for me to go to my next game and just add that in, probably only takes a week. At most, probably less than that, depending on how well I've set up my shaders. Like, it's a relatively light job. The big job, the expensive part of that, was working out that was the solution to the problem.
Yes.
Doing the research, doing the player testing with folks who need that feature. Like, is this doing the job? How can we improve it? What shade of blue should it be? You know, the thinking is the big expensive part. And now, because Last of Us did that and they made that investment, smaller indies like myself,
everyone knows how to do it, right?
I can do that. Yeah, that's like, it's trickle down game design. Like, I can go, it's easy. I can just steal.
And that goes back to what we were saying earlier about how all games help each other, really, because they're all taking things from each other to ultimately improve across the board.
Exactly. And then the other aspect that I think is interesting, on just sticking to the practicality for a bit longer, is the thing I was going to say is a more interesting example of something else earlier, is it's also, rather than money, it can also be about process and order of operations. So a thing our previous games have sucked at is scaling fonts. So making it so that if you have problems with reading smaller fonts,
that's harder than
our
some
games,
people would realize, though. You know.
Yeah. Well, exactly, and I think where it's easy is if you do it from the first day. So for our future projects, we are now doing kind of scaling UI across our games because we built that stuff from day one into those games. Going back and adding that after release to another game, much more difficult, much more tricky. So it becomes about planning and about what we know the expectations of the audience are. In the same way as with localization, if you add localization at the end of a process, it takes forever. If from day one you're putting localization in, you can kind of spread that effort across the project. It's much more easy.
Absolutely.
So there's also just a generational planning thing. Like often, especially in the indie side, like if we get criticism of a feature in our game not being supportive of people, we often won't be able to fix it in that game. We get to then take that into the next game, and kind of our games, if you look at like the accessibility features in our games, they have got like successively better over the games because of that, because we're fixing the problem that was in the last game each time, and that's kind of a more indie approach to it. But yeah, there's practical concerns. The biggest thing, I think, the thing that folks who talk about this and campaign on this stuff have done a really good job of is just shifting that expectation, like what the Overton window of this stuff is, like what's the bare minimum. Because 5 years ago there wasn't any kind of bare minimum. Nowadays, if you ship a game and it's not got some certain core accessibility features, you'll rightly be kind of criticized for that. And in the same way as everyone expects there to be like a separate music and effect slider on the settings, there are now settings that, like, if your game doesn't have it,
there are things.
Like, it's kind of
there are things that become expectation, right?
And that's important, and that's the big thing to shift. But then the art side is the other thing. Is there are certain designers who don't think accessibility should happen, which is very silly.
Of course.
Yeah, that's harder to solve.
I do want to shout out, while we're on accessibility, one of the best accessibility features I've seen recently, and that was in Forza Horizon 5. They added sign language. So
cool.
They actually support sign language in that game. I think.
So do you have like an NPC on the screen doing it?
You have like an actual person doing sign language on the screen. It's
amazing.
Yeah, and I think it's the first time it's ever been done. I could be wrong about that.
That seems like such an expensive solution as well. Just back to my practicality point, like, darn, fair play. But that's the thing, is if you've got those resources, then that's a great way to use them.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
That's really cool. I'm looking that up.
And that's the weird thing, right? Is it plays into my other point of like, that's just been done, but there have been people who've needed sign language playing games since the beginning of games. So why is it only now, in the last few years, that accessibility has actually become a part of conversation, when there are so many millions of gamers in the world that I can guarantee you 40 years ago there were people who needed these features playing video games, Do
you want my incredibly cynical perspective?
Go on.
I think a lot of gamers aged and started to need them. I think that ultimately a lot of the shifts we've seen long term on games is 40 years ago. Not a lot of people who had lived their life to a point where they would have obviously the childhood disabilities, but like the vast bulk of disabilities would be picked up later in life. Younger people were playing games on average, so therefore there were less folks probably who were demanding these features, or at least less folks who were comfortable asking for those features in the way that they would be now. Whereas now I think, the audience is aging up, which means that there's more diversity in all ways in our audience. I think that's a brilliant thing, and it will lead to those kind of conversations. Absolutely. I think as well, just as a culture, we're becoming, I hope, kind of better at thinking about accessibility and equal access and all that stuff.
And considering other people, right?
It's a bold and exciting new approach humanity is taking to actually giving a shit about people. It's why I don't know if it'll catch on, to be honest.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the technology as well, because obviously 40 years ago they probably couldn't do something like that in any way, shape, or form. So like it's just like I said, it's a compliment to things. It's everything coming together to do it.
Yeah, you can also see it culturally in design as well, like playtesting as a way of improving design is really something that only comes in the last like decade or so. Like you've got, I think the one that was the first time I remember hearing about like the first time I remember hearing a game designer talk about actively trying to make a game more engaging for a player was Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, where they were talking about how they place lights in the scenes trying to direct you around.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Valve come in with all of the stuff that they did in kind of the Orange Box era. Kind of their game design became very playtest focused. You've got their Naughty Dog. The kind of the it becoming fashionable for games to not be a thing that punched you in the face, but a thing that actually kind of supported and let you into the experience is a pretty recent and modern kind of invention of game design. Like that's relatively recent. So I guess the natural kind of continuation of playtesting is then to start thinking about, how can if we're getting, X amount of people through the experience, why are these other players unable to get through? And that leans you, I imagine, very quickly towards accessibility stuff, which is maybe it's a natural outcome of playtesting as well.
So as my final question, why do you think there is still this separation in conversation between accessibility and difficulty in a game? Because ultimately difficulty, at least the way I see it is part of accessibility. in my opinion, because easy mode for someone may be the same experience that hard mode is for you as a player. So why do you think there's that separation?
I think it's probably, it's a very natural outcome of how wildly different games are from any other medium that's preceded it. Like literacy in games, and so literacy meaning the knowledge you come in with, and accessibility, so like your ability to actually interact with the game, are presumed as part of the experience and part of the message of what the thing is, in a way that is not true of anything else. There are not different versions of films shot for different audiences who will have a better understanding of mise-en-scène. Like that's not something that would be there. Or there are versions of movies that are made more accessible via, subtitles or audio description or whatever. But you wouldn't. I bet actually, you know what? I bet there are people who say that that audio description ruins the filmic experience, and that you can't really watch a film without being able to see the visuals. I'm sure that conversation is happening somewhere boring in film Twitter. But with games, the kind of the content of the game, the kind of the things the game's trying to say, the feel of the game, the artistic expression of the game is interwoven with the systems of interaction so much more than is elsewhere. I think it is a very it's an uncomfortable conversation, but I think it's kind of a natural conversation to hit at some point, because there are arguments that if you fundamentally change the experience of playing the game, are you compromising it? Are you changing it? My personal opinion is no, you're not, and that you just have to be a better game designer and say what you want to say to every audience member who wants to join you on that journey. But I can see the conversation. Like it's not easily dismissible, like in kind of an immediate kind of, oh, you're talking nonsense. Like I think there is nuance and there is a debate to be had there. I think I'm on the side of it where I don't think that artistic expression should be tied to like closing the door to players.
Yeah.
But I don't have all the answers by any means. Like I think there are some really, I wouldn't want to be in the shoes of designers who are, who make like hyper difficult games, and that's the thing about their games.
So you wouldn't want to make an Elden Ring and sell 12 million copies in 17 days.
I'll take their bank account for sure, but like my point is I wouldn't be able to do that and also have the views I do on accessibility. I don't know how you square those corners. Like I think that's a tricky design, because I bet that's a conversation and an argument that's happened many, many times behind closed doors at the studios that make that kind of work. I'm sure I don't think the conversation's not happening. I think it's fascinating. Like I don't know what the answer is to that.
I mean, we know the conversations happen with Demon Souls when they were doing the remake, but they couldn't like get the balance right from the sounds of it. They couldn't figure out a way to make it much more accessible to people without losing the like how intrinsic getting over that enemy is, sort of thing. If you make it too easy per se, like you don't get the I actually did it sort of thing. Like it's incredibly difficult.
How do you make that easy mode feel the same as normal mode would for a player who doesn't need the easy mode, right?
And that's what I think a lot of players miss is the exact distinction you made of like, it's not about making the game easier, it's about making the experience more similar for players who have different abilities. Like, and that's I think that's where a lot of the audience kind of gets confused, or is like, well, I don't need an easier mode, so why does anyone else? Which just is a startling lack of empathy. But like, I don't know how you solve these problems.
Absolutely, and I mean, it's a conversation for another day, of course. But it goes back to something I always say is I would love more communication between those in the industry and those making games and the consumers themselves, so that consumers are able to actually understand why certain decisions are taken or why certain things are important. Do you know what I mean? Because I do think...
I know what you mean. You should get the consumers to like not send death threats to us whenever we try to have a conversation with them. That would be step one.
Absolutely. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know how you break down that wall. I don't know how you break down that wall of separation there.
You get rid of all the guards along the wall. Like, I think that's I think the vast majority of players of games want to have like straightforward human interaction conversations, chats down the pub about like what's going on with this game and why were these decisions made and whatever. And I think those kind of conversations can happen. The problem is that 1% of bad actors who will jump into anything and cause mischief and make everyone's lives a lot harder.
It's gatekeepers, right? Gatekeeping.
They're gatekeepers, and they're I'm not saying there aren't bad actors on the industry side.
There absolutely are.
There absolutely are. So like, it's a tricky one. I think the average game developer and the average gamer would have a really good, interesting conversation about these kind of things.
Yeah.
The problem is there'd be like 5 people on either side. You'd be in the pub having that conversation, it'd just be like a fight going on around you while you did. And that's always the challenge.
Always the noisiest
is like one of those conversations I always try and have with people around why server-based games and any online-based game will always have problems at launch with their online services. Like, that will never be avoided.
Code, though. They should have optimized their net code. That would have been fine. They didn't bother. They're lazy. They're lazy. That's the problem. Game developers are lazy. That's my main opinion on this.
So, thank you, Mike, for joining us. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that we can actually get you on again in the future, because I think we could talk about a lot more things in the industry with you, and I'm sure you'll release some interesting things in the future that we would like to talk about.
I'm hoping to. We'll see how it gets on.
So where can people follow you for updates on all things Mike Bithell and Bithell Games?
Probably still Twitter's probably the best. So it's not the best, but it's the only place I am. At Mike Bithell on Twitter, BITHELL. Or if you're a podcast listener, Play Watch Listen is a podcast I do with a couple of mates, which is pretty fun.
One of my favorite podcasts.
Is it really? That's astonishing to me. I still don't fully believe that it's actually like released.
I honestly love it. Like, you guys can be talking about something that I have no interest in at all, and I'm still engaged.
When it
Alana showed me the other day that we're like one of the biggest, or not the biggest, but like we're in the top like 20 video game podcasts or something. I'm like,
yeah.
People are listening to this shit.
It was like, a mad one. When it like first got announced, I was like, big fan of Alana Pierce, love Troy Baker, love like Thomas Was Alone, and like Austin Winter, he's done some incredible soundtracks. Like, it's like a perfect coming together for a podcast for me. Like,
and hopefully, we can get them all on this podcast one day. We're one down so far, set. 3 to go.
I know one podcast that told me the other day they've done 3 out of 4.
Wow.
Troy's the tricky one. He's the shiny.
Yeah.
He's the hologram cards. Who's hard to get hold of.
I've met Troy Baker, so I could kind of.
I have too.
Have you? I've heard he's nice.
I've heard that too.
So yes, Mike, thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening or watching this episode. Follow us at G4A Network on Twitter. Subscribe to the Eat Sleep Game YouTube channel if you haven't already, because that's where we live now, apparently. And we will see you next week in episode 90. Goodbye.